Welcome to the Hospitality Maverick podcast with me, Michael Tingsare. We at Hospitality Mavericks are here to inspire leaders to create heart-centered and profitable businesses from the inside out, the kind that both employees and customers love and support. Thanks to BizSimply for sponsoring this episode as our show partner. And BizSimply is the all-in-one HR, workforce management, rota and operations software designed and built by hospitality experts to make every shift run like clockwork. And we join forces to help the industry to find new ways to become even more innovative in how we lead our people, how we operate, to how we grow our businesses, to how we serve our customers. Together we want to share strategies and tools that can make the industry thrive long term, not just survive.
We coined blended microlearning, which is not getting rid of the human moments of learning. That's the good stuff. When Michael learns, how to pull the perfect espresso on the espresso machine and get certified in that machine, he should also be able to get feedback from his manager and potentially even be certified as a trainer. So with Opus, you can actually track data against those skills and also against the feedback that managers are giving you in real time around a specific skill that you've learned. That's that social learning aspect that's so important and leads to better businesses.
This is Rachael Nemeth, CEO and co-founder of Opus, which is a training platform designed for businesses with a deskless workforce. It helps more than 300 businesses boost their training of the frontline. Rachael has an amazing background from operation in hospitality, where she's worked from great brands like Meyer's, Union Square Hospitality. In this conversation, we dive into why and how she got the idea for Opus and what problems they're solving. We also explore the biggest barriers for great training of frontline employees and what she's learned about learning and development in the last 2 years, and what the role of learning plays in building a great company now and in the future. We talk about tech's roles in building better and more impactful training and how tech really can accelerate the speed of learning in a constantly ever-changing world, as well as about how it actually learning and training is crucial for you as you build your culture. She also shares the learnings as a CEO and how to adapt to the role as the business grows. Before you tune in, please sign up for our weekly newsletter, Maverick Talk, which is packed with more Maverick insight, strategies and tools. You'll find the link in the show notes or visit hospitalitymavericks.com. This conversation will make you think about training as well as how tech can help you boost training capacity in a new way. Enjoy. I am super excited because we're going to be talking about something today that we have touched upon before here on the show, but not in the context about how technology can solve this problem, because there's no doubt about it in the world we live in now, and the pandemic probably accelerated that, being able to reach your frontline employees very quickly and share the right information and actually train them in the skill that needs to do a great job or do it well, so both the employee and the customer feels they have a great experience is so critical. And that's in principle one of the things of many we're going to be talking about today. But that was actually what made me really excited when Rachael reached out to me. I think it's now about 3-4 months ago, and then we've been talking a bit and taking a time to get this interview put in place. But I'm really excited about having you here today. I'm really looking forward to dive into Opus and all your learnings about training.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Can you just, like, for people out there, I've already alerted to a bit, we're going to be talking about tech and training, but could you just give people out there a bit an overview about, I think it's very important, your journey really led to this product tech solution you're doing today, and you can dive a bit into this so I don't butcher your solution, but also like why you started Opus and why you saw the need.
Yeah, well, they're inextricably linked, my story and why we started Opus. So the long story is one that we should probably have over beers, but I'll try to keep it short because every founder's journey is much longer than what they're actually saying. But it all started in restaurants. I spent 13 years in restaurants, in every position, in later years in operations, and spent my whole time in restaurants trying to get out of restaurants, for obvious reasons. For all of our listeners here, you're underpaid, you're overworked, there's no mobility, there's no upward mobility. And so anyway, that ran in parallel with an interest in teaching and second language acquisition. I thought, okay, restaurants is just a side gig. I'm paying off my loans from college. This is how I'm going to do it. But what I really want to do is be a professor or an instructor of linguistics. And so, because language was always been a passion of mine. So what I would do is I would teach. I was in restaurants working in operations, most recently for Danny Meyer at Union Square Hospitality Group. I helped open up Untitled at the Whitney. Had to hire 300 cooks in 30 days, and was really not surprised and yet simultaneously flabbergasted at just the lack of access that I, as a director, had to great technology for my frontline. Everyone in the home office had great tech in every job that I had seen. But my frontline, which was like the majority of our team, right? It's 80% of the workforce, didn't have any great tech. So fast forward a couple of years, and I started to solve this access problem because I was really mad. And I started with the thing I knew how to do best, which was training folks in English. 33% of American workers don't speak English as their first language. Brick and mortar schools are not a solution when you have second jobs and kids and commutes. So started to teach English in restaurants between shifts. It was like guerrilla English, right? We would go in for 90 minutes, teach an English class, and leave. And that over the years evolved to really high demand in New York City for restaurants to pay us to go in and teach English classes. And then that evolved to a company called ESL Works, which delivered English language training over text message, really innovative solution to help give like a lightweight technology that can help people learn quickly. And then fast forward to today, Opus is a massively expanded vision of that access problem, which is helping restaurants get their team up the productivity curve quickly, and then getting more out of them so that there's opportunities for economic growth for everyone. So that's the very fast story of how this all started, and all really began with me just being really mad, to be quite honest.
What within that, in that story, what is like the core, you call the purpose, vision, and mission of Opus then? Because you said that it started with a very, very simple thing. You walked in, you did some English training, will then translate it into a text message, but now it's into this platform that can be in the hands of people in no time if they have a smartphone.
Yeah. The mission really at the heart of everything that we're doing is solving the problem of how can we create more work, help people create more work value for themselves, and in order for them to have economic growth in and outside of their jobs. Work value is this term that we coined, which is centered on skill building. It's centered on agency and self-advocacy. And, it's an area that is so commonly focused on when it comes to desk workers. You and I, right? We're constantly talking about leadership skills and soft skills and ways to grow and ways to get promoted and ways to earn more money and ways to support your family better. But then we go downstream to the majority workforce, which is the front line. There's no conversation about actually creating work value and actually being able to not only build skills, but be able to like create a skill portfolio for oneself so that you can continue to grow. And Michael, these are not unskilled workers. We all know this, but there's no way to actually track that data so that individuals can, earn for themselves what they hope to in their lives. So the core of our mission is about creating accessible technology for frontline teams so that they can create more work value in and outside of their job.
And what have you seen, especially connecting to that, very critical mission in a world of so much, disparity and difficulties climbing the ladder? And it seems like we're going into it. What have you seen as you launch the platform and people start using this? What have you learned? I'm thinking about, what do you learn from the frontline employees or the deskless workers that's using this app? What is happening in their lives?
Yeah, I mean, well, a little bit about Opus. I mean, and I know you're talking about this a little bit, but Opus is a mobile first training solution. We're not on text message. That was my previous company, ESL Works, in the early days of Opus, but we have a mobile first solution that can reach the front line very quickly. And simultaneously, we have a lightning fast web dashboard that allows anyone in your organization to build a lesson in under 10 minutes. So think about that and what the possibilities are when, for the first time, you've solved the access problem, where a director of ops has a limited time offer and they can create a lesson really fast and ship it out to 2,000 employees quickly so that they learn what's happening in the company, and everybody can learn that knowledge consistently. When we talked to frontline workers to really understand like what's the core problem, we also talked to the other two users that were largely ignored, which is the manager who's never built for, right? And of course, the person who's in the C-suite who's buying the product but never really uses it because they need someone to manage it. Well, with Opus, we were able to solve for all of this. The one thing we heard from frontline teams was like, listen, like the one piece of technology that I'm using every day at work that no one's actually talking about is my phone. I'm using it to snap a photo of food. I'm using it to look up something quickly on YouTube. Individuals are self-educating every single day at work. And there's this falsehood that your phone is stowed away and you're never using it, but it's just not the reality of what's been happening in the last half decade. So frontline workers are demanding technology that's on their phones. And so we listened. And, it was clear when you have people, screaming your name and saying, this is amazing. Like, for the first time, I actually am learning something interesting and I'm learning it directly in the palm of my hand. And I feel like I actually have a companion to my workday. That you're on the right track. But none of that matters unless you're also hearing from their manager that their manager is getting the data they need in order to connect and build connective tissue with that frontline worker. So that's sort of a long-winded way of saying that when we talk to frontline teams, it's always coming down to this word access and reach. And, that's why it's such a core part of our mission.
And I guess then, because one of my next question was actually, and you probably answered that, was like, what are the barriers to great training of frontline employees? I guess that's the access of, and then relevant training, I guess, as well.
So there's never an issue with relevancy. And I think that's one of the common mistakes when people are talking about training and they're like, it's not, really relevant training. It's not even reaching your team in the first place. So that's false information. Most of the time what we find is that businesses are using paper training. 70% of American restaurants are still using paper packets, these oil stained manuals, which of course don't reach anyone, but they'd rather use that than technology that they know will not reach someone, which is like an email-based, web-based solution that was built for folks at Goldman Sachs and works for those people because they are sitting at a desk all day, but then it was repurposed for the front line, which means that it's completely illogical for that workforce. So adoption is a huge challenge that we had to solve early on in Opus. And, you see that you even see these challenges with like less kind of mission critical tools, scheduling apps, stuff like that, which are a necessary, technology, but just sort of like you got to have it. You got to have scheduling technology. But you still see the adoption issues. So when we think about like the broader technology landscape, we continue to ignore how important it is to create technology that is easy to even log into, which is why, at Opus, you don't need an email, you need a phone number. It's where people, it's unique to one person. It is easy to memorize. It is secure for that person. And so um, it always made sense to us to use phone numbers rather than emails. That's a very simple answer for, a very complex problem. But I think if more technology companies thought about unique ways to log in team members, I think they'd see a higher success rate.
And it's really interesting as well what you're saying, that it's like there's a lot of relevant training and it's actually good, but actually it's not purpose for where the frontline employees are today and when they need it. Because you said something really interesting before, because people were already Googling for solutions. So what about, like, our thinking, as you were saying, that are they, and I guess they were also showing it to other people in the restaurant. Oh, I've found this about a coffee machine or whatever it is online. This works. This is the trick for the coffee machine when it does that. So does Opus also facilitate that sharing between the employees when they have great ideas they can share with the management or who it is? Because often, as my own experience as an ops director, MD of a chain, is that you think you know everything and I'll have all solutions to all problems, but often you're not there on a day-to-day basis, so you don't know that specific location, what works for them, all the smaller hacks that really make it deals.
Yeah. Well, so I love what you're talking about because I think it speaks to our approach and what's unique here. So we're going to get a little bit nerdy just for a second on instructional design. If you're not an instructional designer, it's important, or an operator who's kind of nerdy about training, it's important to understand the different methodologies of learning. There are tons of studies that show that microtraining works. There are tons of studies that show that, as the global attention span is shrinking, we need to be taking in information in smaller snippets. You can only remember 3 pieces of information for every 90 minutes of learning. So lots of good, meaty research that proves that these kind of micro moments are the things that lead to higher knowledge retention, higher knowledge transfer, and therefore more efficacy in your workforce. But that doesn't mean everything has to be digital. So you're talking about this like social learning aspect. Opus uses an approach that we coined blended microlearning, which is not getting rid, and this is so important, not getting rid of the human moments of learning. That's the good stuff. When Michael learns, how to pull the perfect espresso on the espresso machine, and get certified in that machine, he should also be able to get feedback from his manager and potentially even be certified as a trainer. So with Opus, you can actually track data against those skills and also against the feedback that managers are giving you in real time around a specific skill that you've learned. That's that social learning aspect that's so important and leads to better businesses. But right now, what's happening in the state of the millions of businesses across the United States is that there's no visibility on that data. Every manager has these like amazing coaching moments of their team, and they're not actually tracking that. What would happen if for the first time, every single business that employed deskless workers actually had data on every moment that a manager was coaching their team? For the first time, they'd be able to see how effective every part of their business was, because those touch points between 2 humans actually can help you understand how effective your managers are, and by extension, how effective your team is. So the sharing piece and the sharing of knowledge is so critical in the world of work. And I think for the first time, we've cracked the nut to say, yeah, so let's capture the data.
It's really interesting you say there, because we're working on a study right now. We're going to publicize later in the year, where it's in principle looking into companies that's doing really well and what they do, and everybody would say, oh, it's culture. But if you start to break that down, what that means is that they learn people, their culture, the way of doing things. They train them really well. But then in the end, they measure them. And they have, different forms of measurement. But I can see that what you're talking about again, a platform that proves that these what your people will in the old paradigm of business would call soft skills or soft measurements. It's become hard measurements for them, because they know if they hit these points of training and that level of skill with that employee understanding the culture, the vision, the purpose, or the customer service, how to deliver that, or the coffee machine, they know they're going to win. Maybe not directly tomorrow, but over time, they know X amounts of months down, this will come back into the business. And that's how they measure business. And it's so interesting because lots of people only do what's measured. And now you can measure what's really important, in my view, and always have been important, if you invest in it, of course. And now you can see how much time you're investing it before you can see, and then you will see an outcome, I guess, financially. That's actually a really interesting question. The companies you have worked with, what has happened in them as you have started working with them, implementing the platform, and they have, adapted the adaptation curve of adapting the approach and really getting to work out in the front line?
It's simple. They've lowered labor costs. So what's unique about how we see the world is, and I'm going to get glib for a minute here, but like there's a reality to frontline work that I think we've seen all these headlines, around the war for talent and the labor shortage and all these things. And that's true. And it's reality. But what businesses are actually talking about is not necessarily how can I get people to return to work. It's how can I do more with fewer people? And that's as a result of a combination of multiple things that are happening in the world today, which means that more than ever, businesses are thinking about how they can get higher output from their team, which means, I'll give you an example from the last recession in 2008. Just because you're lowering headcount and lowering labor, it doesn't mean you're lowering your demand for high output. And so it's really important for businesses to think about how can I reduce those labor costs, but increase the output of the people that are working with me. As a result of that, one of our many metrics for success, and there's all of the learning metrics, but the business metric, the thing that businesses are really looking for is not, hey, can I just reduce turnover? That's where I'm getting really glib. They're actually thinking about how can I reduce labor costs? So we've been able to show that we can reduce training labor costs by up to 60, sometimes 80% with businesses, saving them $100,000 a year. So think about that. For the first time, employees can just train on the floor for a few minutes a day. You can track data on them. You don't have to throw them into a linen closet to learn or a classroom. They don't have to step off the floor in order to train. And that's what's happening in every single restaurant today, is this kind of unseen cost where like Judy has to hop off the floor for 10 minutes to take that training or to talk with that manager or to have a team meeting. What if for the first time you could do all of that asynchronously, track data on it, and be able to show that for the first time you're actually getting those labor dollars back?
So it was really interesting you said about turnover, because lots of business I've been involved in, like that's a metric you could be measured on, and there's sometimes you're not absolutely in control of that turnover, because it's a transit industry. But what have you learned around turnovers as well? Because my hypothesis has always been that if you give people skill and you train them, give them transferable skills, they feel that actually they get confident enough they can leave you, they actually stay for longer, or they never go, because they know they're getting something really, really special. They're not getting in maybe 90% of other places.
And that's where ramp up becomes really important. It's about the speed at which, I tell this story all the time, but what's happening right now in businesses across the United States, and we'll talk about restaurants specifically, is that somebody's walking through that revolving door and the manager's looking at them and they're saying, hey, are you breathing? okay, you can work here. It's like literally that's what's happening. So what happens is there's this enormous challenge for businesses. These managers are stretched thin. So there's this question of, well, how can I make sure that Michael feels welcome from the moment he walks through that door? It's impossible to send someone to a corporate office now. There's no time to be able to like gather your new hires in your first week. There's no like cohorted onboarding training, and especially there's no rise in training managers. There's a reduction in training managers right now. So you have to replace a lot of that with software. So we believe that the faster you can ramp up your people, and there's lots of studies that show this, the faster you can ramp them up, get them up to speed on your company culture, your values, what their job is, the more likely they are to stay longer. And it might not be for a lifetime, but it could be that you're going to be able to keep that person 90, 100, 1,000 days longer simply because they had a better onboarding experience.
That's super interesting because I guess also that, like consumers, the employees that now has the, you can say they have the negotiation power if they arrived in a company and they feel it doesn't go fast enough, or the employee experience is not really giving them, the training is not really coming so they can do a great job and feel good, then they will just leave quicker. And I guess it's your job as the business or the CEO or the department is and responsible for this to create that experience so it actually feels like it's moving very fast. And they almost, I guess, this is a guess because I've not seen data, but they almost expect it to be digital, most of it. They don't expect it somebody to come and train them.
I think if they do expect it to be digital, they expect it to be a legacy system, the kind of dinosaur systems where they have to go into an office and log in, and it's only in English, and it's so imagine that if you're walking into a business and you're like, ugh, I have to sit in front of a computer for 3 hours and complete this sexual harassment prevention, and I have to watch, this ages old video, and then, my manager maybe comes in to check on me once, but then doesn't ask me any questions about it. It doesn't make you feel welcome. So there's no, I don't think there's like an immediate demand for digitizing training. I think the broader demand from the front line, who now has more power than ever, it's basically like walking through the door and it's like, what do you got? What do you have? I think what we're hoping with Opus is that Opus can be the thing that, ultimately frontline workers are demanding and saying, do you have Opus here? Is that how you train your team? Because that is the way that we want to be capturing our skills and being able to demonstrate our value over time. And we're already starting to see early signs of that. 20% of our business right now is from managers referring us to other companies, which is that's our metric for success. If people are referring Opus, then we know we're doing a good job. So yeah, I don't know if like the demand is for digital necessarily, but the demand is for better technology.
And that's so interesting. So if you do that, I guess you have a competitive advantage when it comes to attracting people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
What was like anything, because we've gone through the pandemic. I know you launched in the midst of all that chaos as well, Opus, and what has like been the learnings around learning and training that really have blown your mind. It's like one thing where you think, wow, that was changing over these 2 years.
It's a great question. This was something that we saw pre-pandemic that was trending already, but the pandemic accelerated it. And it's the fact that the training function in these businesses is now increasingly falling under the operations arm and not HR. And why do you think that is? Well, it's because HR now has more on their plate, right? Like they're overseeing all of these safety protocol, like pandemic protocols, things like that, compliance. We're living in an increasingly litigious world. And so like the traditional role of HR is starting to come back to light. So that's one thing. But also, I think, and more primarily, businesses are realizing that training must be an operational function. It must reach every part of your workforce at every step of their employee journey. So it would be a mistake not to say, well, of course, our COO should be overseeing the efficacy of our workforce. And therefore, of course, we should be thinking about the most effective training and upskilling program we possibly can. Because when you're only thinking about training in a compliance bucket, it's only about 15% of what's actually happening on the job. So the pandemic just catapulted that due to like HR being stretched thin and needing, to be focusing on these really critical parts of the business, and COO saying, shit, well, I I have like less people. I need to be thinking about how to attract those people, but also how to keep those people longer and get them up the productivity curve faster.
I can remember myself being in numbers of jobs where actually training has been on and off in through HR and back over to operation and the other way again. And actually it fitted always best in operation because they're the one that's going to be using the training, and therefore HR can, of course, from a strategic point of view, support you on making sure you have the right skills in your training program as the future are needed for attracting talent of the future.
Well, and I'll tell you this, 100% of our business is dealing with COOs. We don't sell to HR. We love HR. We talk to them and they're friends of ours. But, the reality is that when businesses think about training differently, when they think about training as a mission critical function, it's typically the operations arm that's really taking a holistic view and saying, okay, we need to partner with HR on this. We also need to make sure that the output of this program is something that is impacting the business's bottom line in a really meaningful way.
Yeah, that's super interesting that actually the CEO is now not just responsible for training, but I guess also they have become much more responsible for tech solutions, because these tech solutions really impact their business. Like, it's people and tech that really drive these day-to-day businesses now.
Yeah, and the rise in IT and tech in restaurants, we all know, we've seen it with, just over the pandemic, a lot of the spotlight was on these on-demand delivery companies and things like that. But that's not why the IT function is being positioned, like placed in all of these restaurants. It's not just because of that one piece of technology. It's that there is an entire stack that a restaurant needs to manage right now. And that is not exclusive of the training function. And frankly, just like the efficacy of your front line.
If we take the conversation a bit out of tech and training, and from your experience being very close to the both to the operational part of the business, but also the front line, what do you see as the biggest challenges for food and drinks businesses right now and in the nearby future? Because there's so much going on still. We are out of a pandemic, but it seems like some very big mountain to climb ahead as well.
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think one of the biggest challenges that restaurants are seeing right now is, sure, it's how can I attract more talent, but it's more about how can I increase the efficiency of my workforce, increase the productivity of my workforce, especially with the direction that we're entering a recessionary era. This is how operators are thinking right now. These are the conversations that we're having at Opus. So I think we're going to see a lot of the headlines start to change in QSR, from QSR Mag to The Guardian. It's going to be less around the war for talent, and I think it's going to be a lot more around what are kind of the metrics for success in a business when it comes to our front line, and how can we ensure that we're getting that software is used to enhance the humans that we employ, because we can't replace those humans with technology, but we can definitely ensure that we're helping to empower them to get the most out of their day, basically. And by extension, hopefully it means that we can keep those people longer, pay them more, and increase opportunities for growth.
Yeah, and that really confirms something I've seen and heard as well, is that that's been very focusing on how technology really could help the customer experience, where there's now is a shift that there's a radical acceptance of the war for talent, the lack of people. But how do we then make that experience better? And how do we use tech to make that a more effective experience, not just on the HR side of software, but also like operational? How do we make their day easier because they get burned out and frustrated by things not working and the information they didn't get? That's really, the progressive and forward looking operators working that they haven't got it all right, but they're definitely working on that and understanding that actually is a massive gap in their business, where they probably the customer facing technology is a bit more slick and seamless in many ways. What about you? As you founded a business, you elevated that or pivot that or whatever you want to call it during the pandemic, and now you have this platform out. It's going really fast. Customers needs your product. It sounds like there's a big need, and you have lots of success. But also that's a big challenge as a founder CEO. I know, and it'd be great to hear your learnings as well over the last couple of years, and what is your struggles and what is your victories and.
Mm. I think, you know, uh, growth and adjustment and iteration are just a natural part of any business, especially a technology business where you can make changes quickly. So that is something I think that's to be expected. But one thing that I think has um, really been just personally interesting for me is just my growth as a CEO. And, I'm entering a new chapter where for a while there were like the kind of reporting structure was different. I had a hand in so much of the business down to the nitty gritty and all the way up to the high. It was a lot of like zooming in and zooming out. Because we're still pretty early stage, right? Um, but now I'm entering, chapter 3, I guess, of CEO, which is been super interesting for me. It's the part where I'm like primarily zoomed out and I'm helping guide people, um, continually guide people toward our vision. There's like I find myself like captaining the mission more and more, and as a result of that, it's continued to challenge me to kind of confirm our vision and our mission, and iterate on it, and maybe create a second mission, and really kind of expand our view of the world from like what's going to happen 5 years from now to what's going to happen 20 years from now, and what's the immense impact we can make on the broader world. So it's been a really like meditative experience for me, but also a really important one. I think the thing that like a lot of CEOs don't talk about is this process, which is like, okay, our company is growing up, but that's because we're growing up and we're changing and we're evolving. I think about like CEOs who I admire, like Noah Glass from Olo, and I wonder to myself, the CEO of Toast, like what happened in that transition for them when they went from a private company to a public company? That's got to be a totally different evolution as a CEO. So that's the fun part. We're like, I'm learning too. I'm training too as a CEO every day.
Yeah, and then I guess you're never done on that journey, and it's like also like going through these phases also does something with you. You become the person you need to become
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
to face the obstacles you face in any businesses, because there's more obstacles than the eye can see sometimes, both internally and in the reality of running a business. That's super interesting. What is one advice you would like to give in that transition? As you said, that's not something that's talked about when you transition from the smaller startup bootstrapping to raising funding to scale up. Is there like one advice you would like to give to founders, or question maybe they should think about?
Yeah. I give this advice all the time and I try my best to follow it too. Sometimes I forget, so that's why it's good to say it out loud. As we're all transitioning in roles, Be mindful if there's ever a moment of self-doubt. Be mindful of imposter syndrome. Be mindful of the moments where you need to talk to a friend or talk to someone and say, listen, like, I'm feeling this. I'm feeling like I'm not worthy of this job, or I can't do it. And a lot of the time that's imposter syndrome creeping in. And the best remedy for that is to talk about it, and to find a friend and to get a support system, because otherwise you're just going to enter this vicious circle of like, I can't do it. I don't know if I can do it. And I say that from a very vulnerable point of view, because I think, and frankly, like especially as a female CEO, we're kind of forced to have this like hard edge all the time and can't be vulnerable or have to be a different kind of vulnerable. And I don't think that has to be true. So the best advice is find a support system, even if it's one person to talk to and be vulnerable with when you can.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, when you show, it's been my own experience, your vulnerability, it doesn't mean you can, of course, you're the leader of the business, you don't run around and vulnerable all the time. But when you do, and I had Paul Hargreaves on the podcast recently. He runs like a business for wholesale food distribution, and he said after he's been doing some very purposeful work in Kenya for school kids, he came back and he was crying to his staff, and they know he cries sometime now because the business is so connected to purpose. But actually that gives them drive as well, that you actually you're honest about how you feel, but it doesn't mean you have lost control. You're just honest about how you feel. And often we are never in control anyway. That's the reality. We just
That's a
want to
whole other
believe
podcast. Yeah.
That's a whole other podcast. How do you then, as like, as yourself, that you're growing up as the CEO, how do you actually show up pro every day? How do you get like the best out of yourselves and make most probably positive impact? How do you actually try to keep yourself in a good place? Because it's a very tough place to be, to keep the balance as well, and make sure you hit all the areas of life.
Oh gosh, I'm still trying to figure that out, but I will say I'll talk about the physical and then I'll talk about the mental and emotional. So from a physical perspective, one big change for me, and I don't like preach this a lot. It was just like, it's not advice. It's just for me, it worked personally. I cut way back on coffee. I only have a cup of coffee a day, and I was drinking 4 or 5 cups a day and starting to get jittery because I didn't like that feeling of being tired. I didn't like feeling groggy. And now, as long as I'm getting 6 to 8 hours of sleep, yeah, some days I might wake up and I'm a little tired, but that's okay. And to replace it with a stimulant, I sound pretty woo woo right now, but like, it's been great for me. Like I'm the curve of my energy is so much more natural. I don't crash at 7 o'clock at night. I like stay up till 10 or 11. I wake up at like 5 or 6, and I kind of listen to the rhythm of my body, where every person who's listening has that like half hour, 1 hour in the day where you're like, oh, this is where I get a little flatline a little bit. I don't replace that with coffee anymore. Now I just say like, okay, this is the time where I'm going to do that like work that doesn't require a lot of strategy, where I'm going to like pay the bills, or I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to as a result of that, I felt like a lot healthier physically, and a lot more mentally balanced. From a mental perspective, I've really just tried to ensure that I'm like maintaining the support system I need. And it's changed over the years. So, I try to keep family and work as separate as I possibly can, but I'm also like open when there's parts of my work life that are just penetrable and and like leaking into my world. I used to, years ago when I was working in restaurants, I would bleed every part of my work life into my personal life. You know this if you worked in restaurants. And then when I switched to software, I like kept them highly separate. And now I'm trying to find this like really nice natural blend of because I love my job and I love the work that we do. But I also want to have moments where I shut off too. And I, think about the business, but it doesn't have to like penetrate every inch of my being. And by extension, that my personal life doesn't have to penetrate every extension of my work life.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we asked this question, or I have asked this question many, many times, probably more than 200 times on the show, and everybody has their own algorithm, as you says. And funny enough, coffee is actually one of them I took up this year as well, and trying to keep to 1 to 2 cups a day because, like, I'm really, really, really love coffee in many kind of way because that's why I worked in a coffee world. But again, I found the same as you, absolutely the same. And then I create those moments around the coffee also to be moments of stillness in the morning when I get up before the kids get up, and I use it after lunch too as well to just get a bit of fuel to the afternoon. And I also, like you, just accept there's times during the day where you're gonna flatline and just you need to lean into them, go for a nap or walk, do something that doesn't demand a lot of brain power.
Because it's not actually, coffee doesn't, or any sort of stimulant doesn't actually make that go away. It doesn't. That's like the lie that we've been told is, okay, well, you can replace this hour. If you drink an espresso for this hour, you're going to be really productive. And it's like, no, I just have like a buzz in my head. I'm not actually any more productive than I would have been.
Yeah, your clarity of your mind is not bigger than that. If you should give like an advice to leaders out there, and I think I'm tweaking this question today a bit, like the want to build a business for that actually are good or great because they've implemented healthy training practices, what would your advice be?
I will tell you where you should not start. Do not start by saying, okay, in order to have a great training program, we need to document 100% of what's happening in the business. Why do you think that's a bad thing to do? Well, it's because we are working in an incredibly dynamic industry. So the task of documenting everything all at once up front is actually, it's a fool's errand. There's 60% of what we're doing is probably consistent for the next year, right? Job descriptions, roles, how we get new hires up to speed, perhaps, but even that I would say is dynamic. About 40% of it is changing on a constantly, based on supply chain, based on the inflation rates and menu prices, based on customers and how they're flowing in through our stores. So the advice I have, therefore, is just start. And it doesn't have to start with like, I'm going to document everything. It can start by saying, okay, is technology the best solution for us? If you're a multi-unit restaurant, it probably is. That's what we continue to find. And don't be afraid to just start with 1 or 2 use cases when you're digitizing your training. We've seen this a lot. There's like, when people are on these kind of like legacy learning management systems, they'll tell us stories around how it took them 2-3 years to get all of their training up and running. And we're sitting and, talk with my co-founders and we're like, it just doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to take years to get your company knowledge into a system. It can take a couple of weeks. So focus on a couple of use cases, new hire training and role-based training, or safety training and just-in-time training, and kind of expand from there. But none of it matters. None of it matters if you're not getting it to your front line in the first place, so you can get feedback from them. So start small.
Yeah, that's a very good advice, because I think that doesn't only go for training, it goes for so many things.
Yes.
Start small, for good sake, start changing slowly. 1% every day becomes a lot over time. If people want to know more about Opus and you and connect with you, where do they go? What is the best places to go?
So you can always follow us online, follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram at Get Opus or Opus Training. You can follow my rants about legacy systems on LinkedIn. If you follow Rachael Nemeth or connect with me, I'm always happy to connect with folks. And we put a lot of work out there. So we write a lot of thought pieces around how we think about the world of learning and how we think about the world of operations as it relates to training. So check us out, and pretty much any publication for restaurants, we're probably in there, waxing poetic about the beauty of technology and learning, QSR magazine, things like that.
Great stuff, and we'll put some of that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing your insights, your journey, your learnings, both from a tech company serving restaurants, but also your journey as a CEO. We wish you all the power and energy you and the team needs to success, and helping frontline employees getting more work value, as you called it, a new word I learned today, because I think that's an absolutely critical thing if you think outside solving business problem, but actually helping people to climb the ladder.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Thank you so much, Rachael, for your great advice on how to optimize your training and your insights on what we can learn from aggressive companies that uses tech to boost the effectiveness of their training and thereby build better culture. Now, ask yourself, how can I use tech to boost the effectiveness of my training for my frontline employees? If you want to learn more about learning and development, please tune in to episode 73 with David Claassen, founder of Talent for Performance on Self-Leadership. A big thank you to BizSimply for supporting us, bringing great insights, strategies, and tools to help leaders become better every day. Check them out at bizsimply.com or on the social at bizsimply or bizsimplyhq. You can also email them directly at advice@bizsimply.com. Thank you to Fayre Charlton, who's the show producer and editor for the Podcast Collective. So if you enjoyed today's conversation, please share, rate, review, or subscribe to one of our channels, which all can be done via the website hospitalitymavericks.com. If you have any ideas or feedback for the show or thoughts, reach out to me via LinkedIn or via my email, michael@hospitalitymavericks.com. Tune in next time for another interview, and in the meantime, find out more about us and subscribe to the weekly newsletter Maverick Talk via hospitalitymavericks.com. I'm Michael Tingsager, and you've been listening to the Hospitality Maverick Podcast Show. Be